So we were sitting around the dining room table the other night, and as probably has happened at many dining room tables recently, Donald Trump became part of the conversation. And things got interesting almost immediately. People just started getting upset and angry and so on. But it was a bit more historical, and this was right after James Comey was fired. And somebody said, well, I don't know if that's legal, I don't know if that's ethical, and somebody else said, well, that's dishonest, and somebody else said impeachment, and somebody else said memos, and somebody else said tape recordings. My grandson, who's 12 years old, he says, we're studying in Peru Central, we're studying about President Nixon and tape recordings and impeachment. And I said, that's good. And I wasn't really surprised that they were talking about that in school, because as soon as Flynn resigned and Comey got fired and memos and tape recordings became part of the conversation, Richard Nixon became part of the conversation. He's the touchstone, he's the icon, he's the reference point for all kinds of failures of government leadership. He's the person that we look to sort of measure everything else by. We even have an adjective, Nixonian. It's not good. It's not like Lincoln-esque. No, it's bad. And, you know, if somebody says Nixon on cable news, you can bet very shortly you're going to hear Watergate, burglary, Archibald Cox, Saturday Night Massacre. You might even hear 5 o'clock shadow. They're just going to put it all together. And he's everywhere. I mean, even Hillary mentioned him the other day at Wellesley. She referenced Richard Nixon in her. After 45 years, his crimes are still current. The man is still there all the time. And he has remained, forever a failure, a criminal, a joke, Tricky Dick forever. And that's when I went to the closet. I left the dining room table and I went up to the closet because Natalie told me to look for skeletons. And so I went up to the closet and I was looking among the detritus of my 70 years, and I was looking for one photograph, my skeleton, and I found it. Because it occurred to me, who the hell would be involved? Who would want to be associated, for God's sakes, with Richard Nixon? So I brought the photograph down and I took it to my grandson, Sam. And it was a picture of a 50-year-old man in a nice suit. Looked like he needed a shave. And he was standing next to this woman who was in a bridal gown. It was just stunningly beautiful. The sun was shining on both of them. And I took it to Sam and I said, Sam, that's Richard Nixon. That's the guy you're studying in class. And of course, kids are always really responsive. I taught for 30 years. I know they're really responsive. And Sam said, huh. That was my career. Happened 5 periods a day, every day. You'd give them just pearls, and they'd say, huh. Now, those were the good days. So anyway, I said that was 1963. He wasn't president at that time. And I said, the woman next to him, that's your Aunt Mary. That's my sister. And he said, huh. My father met Nixon in the Second World War. They were 2 pretty tough guys. They had both survived impoverished childhoods, then the Great Depression. Now they were part of the war effort, both in the Navy. Nixon was already a lawyer. My father had started as a sandhog in New York City's water tunnels. But what brought them together in the Navy was card playing. They both loved to play cards, poker and gin, and apparently they played an awful lot, and they played for money, and they apparently played for more than either one of them could afford at the time. But that's how their friendship really grew, and maybe proving the old adage that men find their friends through their games and women find their games through their friends. But in any case, at the end of the war, Nixon went back to to California. My father went back to New York City. They didn't hear from each other, didn't have much contact. But in 1953, Nixon was Eisenhower's VP, and the inauguration was occurring. Nixon invited everybody in the family, 5 kids, mother and father, to go to Washington, D.C. for the inauguration, and we did. In 1957, the same thing. Everybody went to the inauguration because Nixon invited us. I didn't go. I didn't go because I thought it was much more important to play in a CYO basketball game. I had the opportunity to maybe meet President Eisenhower, shake hands with the Allied Supreme Commander of D-Day. I thought a CYO basketball game was much more important. It's sort of my version of, right? In any case, after Nixon lost to Kennedy in 1960, he spent some time at our house. He did go to the weddings of my sisters. He played the piano at the receptions. I found him to be really interesting. He talked to me about what I was reading, and we talked about the Mets, who in 63 and 64 had not achieved anything amazing yet and were incredibly woeful, and he was interested in that. My father died on the Saturday before the Tuesday that Nixon was elected in 1968, but Nixon's secretary called the family and said he would try to get to the to the funeral. Of course, that call was made by Rosemary Woods, who in a couple of years was going to become even more famous for losing 18 minutes of a tape recording that she was supposed to be transcribing. If you ever see the pictures of how she did that inadvertently, it shows someone with the kind of flexibility that the people in Cirque du Soleil really, they envy, because they can't do that. In any case, the Secret Service did come. They looked at the church, but Nixon didn't come to the funeral because it was on the same day as the election itself. He's the skeleton that lives in our closet. In our closet is this political ogre, this disgrace, this man who undid his career, who resigned in disgrace, who has become a punchline. That's what he was in public. But Bret Hart has always told me in his short stories that there's bad in the best of us and good in the worst of us. Publicly, that's what Richard Nixon has become famous for. To us, he was very kind, he was very generous, gave us of his time. He was a friend, and he's the skeleton that lives in our closet. Thank you.